Death is terrifying, but waiting for it can be even worse. Across the world, death row inmates live a nightmare that combines psychological suffering with brutal and often inhumane execution methods. For some, the wait itself feels like torture, while others face unimaginable cruelty in their final moments. From faulty lethal injections to horrifying public executions, the ways in which governments carry out the death penalty expose a dark side of justice. These methods aren't just about punishment, they're about control, fear, and erasing people from existence. Time stops on death row, the endless torture of waiting. Time becomes an unbearable wait for prisoners on death row. Every second drags on as inmates wait for the day their lives will end. For some, the wait lasts weeks. For others, it stretches into decades, as legal battles and appeals delay their execution dates. This uncertainty about when, or even if, they will die is a form of psychological torture that slowly picks at the mind. In the United States, some inmates have waited more than 20 years for their execution, confined to tiny cells where the world seems to stand still. Imagine waking every morning, not knowing if it will be your last, hearing footsteps down the hall, and wondering if they're coming for you. Every sound, every movement outside the cell brings anxiety. For many inmates, the stress leads to severe mental health issues, including paranoia, depression, and even psychosis. The isolation and lack of human interaction make this existence even more unbearable. The psychological impact on these inmates is so severe that some choose to end their own lives rather than keep going through the misery of waiting. For them, the passage of time on death row doesn't heal, it destroys. Death flights in Argentina, a drop into the void. During Argentina's dirty war, the military government developed a method of execution so cruel it is impossible to understand: death flights. Thousands of political opponents, activists, and intellectuals who were deemed enemies of the dictatorship disappeared without a trace, their fates sealed in horrifying secrecy. These individuals were told they were being transferred to a new location, but what awaited them was far beyond redemption. Victims were subjected to unspeakable torture before being drugged and loaded onto military aircraft. Drugged but often still conscious, they were flown over the Atlantic Ocean, or the River Plate. Mid-flight, the prisoners were stripped of their clothes and thrown alive into the water below. Many woke up during the fall, crashing to their deaths, either drowning in the freezing water or dying from the impact. Their bodies were never recovered, leaving families to live with the pain of unanswered questions. These flights were a calculated act that erased them by eliminating both the prisoners and any evidence of their deaths. The government denied victims even the dignity of a burial. The ocean became their grave, and their names became whispers in history. The sheer cruelty of death flights stands as a chilling reminder of how power can be used to inflict not just death, but total doom. Lethal injection. The myth of a humane death. Lethal injection, the most common method of execution in the United States, is often presented as a clinical, painless way to kill. But beneath the exterior of humanity lies a process full of horror. The procedure involves injecting the person convicted with 3 drugs. The first causes unconsciousness, the second paralyzes the body, and the third stops the heart. While this sounds straightforward, in reality, it is anything but. Botched executions are alarmingly frequent. If the first drug fails to knock the inmate unconscious, they are left aware but paralyzed, unable to scream or move as the other drugs take effect. They feel their lungs shut down and their hearts stop, suffocating in terrible pain. In some cases, executioners struggle to find a vein, leading to prolonged, painful procedures where needles are inserted repeatedly. Some inmates scream in pain for over an hour, their deaths anything but peaceful. Electrocution, a death by fire and voltage. Electrocution was once the symbol of modern execution, designed to be a quick and efficient way to kill. But in practice, it often results in horrifying scenes of pain and suffering. Those sentenced are strapped into a wooden chair, their heads and legs fitted with electrodes, and a powerful electrical current is sent through their bodies. Ideally, this would stop the heart immediately. However, many executions have gone tragically wrong. In incorrectly performed electrocutions, the current fails to kill instantly, causing the inmate's body to tremble violently. Their muscles seize, their pupils expand, and in some cases, their skin burns as smoke rises from their flesh. In extreme cases, the body catches fire, filling the execution chamber with the smell of burning flesh. Witnesses often describe these scenes as unbearably gruesome, with some spectators left physically ill from what they've seen. Electrocution's supposed efficiency is undermined by these horrific failures, extending the misery of death. Despite being phased out in many places, this method continues to exist in some US states as an unsettling reminder of how even modern executions can go terrifyingly wrong. Public executions in Saudi Arabia. Death as a stage show. In Saudi Arabia, execution is not just a punishment, it's a public event. Beheadings are often carried out in lively streets, with crowds gathering to witness the spectacle. Crimes that lead to execution include drug offenses, murder, and even opposition to politics, raising serious questions about the fairness of the justice system. The sentenced are led into the square, blindfolded and bound, and forced to kneel. The executioner, wielding a sword, strikes with precision, severing the head in a single blow. While swift, the act's public nature turns it into a performance. Crowds watch in silence, or sometimes stunned, as lives are taken before their eyes. The government argues that these public executions serve as a form of intimidation, but for many, they represent a horrifying abuse of power. Internationally, the practice draws sharp criticism for its brutality and lack of due process. Yet, within Saudi Arabia, it continues to be deeply rooted in the country's cultural and legal systems. Torture and neglect in Myanmar. A death row of suffering. Death row in Myanmar is a place where cruelty grows unrestrained. Inmates suffer not only the fear of execution, but also the daily misery of inhumane living conditions. Cells are overcrowded, food is limited, and medical care is nearly non-existent. Many prisoners die not from execution, but from untreated illnesses, malnutrition, or injuries inflicted by guards. Torture is a routine part of life on Myanmar's death row. Prisoners are beaten, subjected to emotional suffering, and often placed in isolation for extended periods. For those awaiting execution, the psychological distress is never-ending. The government's lack of transparency adds another layer of cruelty, as prisoners are often executed without warning, leaving their families in the dark. The extent of neglect within Myanmar's prison system transforms death row into a slow and torturous death sentence. For many inmates, execution becomes a release from the unbearable suffering they endure daily. Mass executions, a chilling display of power. Mass executions are among the most horrifying forms of capital punishment, where governments take the lives of dozens or even hundreds of people at once. In countries like Iran, in Saudi Arabia, these events are alarmingly common, often carried out without fair trials. In Iran, political prisoners, activists, and minority groups are frequently targeted. Trials are often fraudulent, with confessions extracted through torture. Families are left in the dark until after the executions, sometimes finding out about their loved ones' deaths through media reports. In Saudi Arabia, mass executions often take the form of public beheadings, with dozens killed in a single day. These events serve as a brutal display of state power, designed to silence opposition and create anxiety in the population. The scale of these executions is incredible. In 2022, Saudi Arabia executed 81 people in a single day, the largest mass execution in its history. These acts of violence, carried out under the cover of justice, reveal a chilling disregard for human life. The death penalty leaves behind a trail of pain, fear, and unanswered questions. For those sentenced to death, it's a journey filled with suffering that ends in unimaginable ways. For their families, it's a wound that may never heal. Does such cruelty have a place in the modern world? These stories remind us that behind all statistics is a human life lost, broken, and erased.